My son Adrian watched impassively as a legal aide handed me a document in the polished marble foyer of what I'd always called home. "Mother, it's time for you to transition to a more suitable living arrangement by the end of the week," he stated, his voice devoid of warmth. I shredded the paper, tossing the pieces at his perfectly tailored suit. His response? He immediately instructed his assistant to dial the authorities on his own mother. If you're seeing this, please subscribe and let me know your thoughts. But first, let me rewind and explain how a mother who liquidated every asset to spare her dying child ended up being treated like a common trespasser by the very person she'd snatched from the jaws of death. My name is Eleanor Vance, and 3 days ago, I learned that the line between profound devotion and sheer idiocy is often invisible to the one making the sacrifice. "Adrian, what is this travesty?" I managed, my hands trembling around the official papers. My 37-year-old son, sleek in an ensemble that could fund my existence for months, stood under the grand archway of what was once undeniably my estate. "It's quite simple, Mother. A formal notice. You have 72 hours to vacate the premises." His tone was chillingly detached, as if he were discussing a minor inconvenience rather than consigning his own flesh and blood to destitution. I scrutinized his face, desperate to find even a flicker of the boy I'd nurtured, the man for whom I'd emptied my entire world just 3 years prior. "This is my home, Adrian." "Actually, it isn't anymore." He tapped at his tablet, displaying a digital document. "The property was legally transferred to me nearly 2 years ago when your financial situation became untenable. You remember, don't you?" Of course I remembered. How could I ever forget liquidating my ancestral home, selling my vintage car, and draining every last penny of my pension to finance his aggressive leukemia treatment? How could I forget humbly settling into his guest suite like some unwelcome relative during his arduous recovery? "But you're well now," I whispered, a desperate plea in my gesture. "The doctors had opinions," Adrian replied, his expression glacial. "But medical debt doesn't magically vanish with recovery. This property must be sold to settle the outstanding balance." "Where am I supposed to go?" He offered a dismissive shrug. "That concern no longer falls within my purview. You're 64, Mother. The local social services department can assist you in finding appropriate senior housing." A sharp internal fracture resonated within my chest, not my heart, that had been slowly fracturing for months as Adrian, despite his miraculous recovery, drifted further and further away. This was something far more primal, the final brittle thread of my maternal bond snapping clean. "After everything I did for you," my voice was barely audible. "I never compelled you to beggar yourself," he countered, glancing at a luxury watch, clearly indicating more pressing engagements. "That was your prerogative." It was then that I flung the shredded document fragments at him. It was then he retrieved his phone, calmly informing 911 that his emotionally volatile elderly mother was causing a disturbance and might pose a threat. 2 hours later, I was alone in the dimly lit parking lot of the Sunset Gables Inn, with a single carry-on and a meager $312 in my account, watching my son's sleek electric sedan disappear into the twilight. The very car I'd helped him acquire 6 months earlier, believing it was the last significant allocation of my savings. My room reeked of stale smoke and despair. The threadbare carpet was stained with untold histories, and the air conditioner wheezed a mechanical death rattle. I sank onto the edge of the bed, trying to comprehend how my existence had shrunk to this pathetic circumference. Tomorrow, I'd have to embark on the humiliating quest for permanent lodging. Tomorrow, I'd have to swallow my pride and approach social services, just as Adrian had callously suggested. Tomorrow, I'd have to finally accept that the son I'd raised had morphed into an unrecognizable stranger. But tonight, I was consumed by rage. Rage at Adrian for his calculated cruelty. Rage at myself for my blind, foolish devotion. Rage at a world where selflessness apparently guaranteed nothing but scorn. I was still simmering when a discreet knock echoed on my door at 9:45. Through the peephole, a formidable man in an impeccably tailored suit stood, holding a slim leather attaché case, radiating an aura of profound reluctance. At 64, my instincts about people were finely honed, and this man exuded something. He possessed the quiet authority of those who deal in grave matters, a confidence born of navigating ethical tightropes and untangling complex deceptions. "Mrs. Vance," he stated, his voice carrying a practiced gravity, "I am Sterling Thorne, an investigator with the Special Investigations Unit for Healthcare Fraud." He presented a slim, official-looking badge. "I need to speak with you about your son." I unlatched the chain, but only barely cracking the door. "If Adrian has dispatched you, you're mistaken," I managed, my voice tight. "Mrs. Vance, your son has no knowledge of my presence," he assured, his gaze sweeping the grubby corridor with a practiced wariness. "In fact, it is imperative that he remains oblivious to our discussion. May I step inside?" The sheer weight of his plea compelled me to retract the chain and allow him entry. He cast a professional eye over the shabby room, a careful observation that suggested he had witnessed far worse, though perhaps not by much. "Mrs. Vance, I need you to sit down for this." "I'm perfectly capable of standing," I retorted, the thought of surrender repugnant after the day's humiliations. Agent Thorne opened his attaché case and produced a thick, bound dossier. "For the past half-year, our unit has been meticulously investigating a highly sophisticated insurance fraud operation. Your son is the architect of this scheme." The floor beneath me seemed to undulate. "That's preposterous. Adrian had cancer. He required immediate aggressive treatment. I funded—" "Mrs. Vance, your son has been in full remission for almost 2 years." The word struck me with the force of a physical impact, stealing the very air from my lungs. I sank onto the stale mattress, the threadbare springs groaning in protest. "What madness are you uttering?" I whispered, disbelief warring with a nascent dread. Based on all official medical documentation, Adrian Vance's leukemia was eradicated by early 2023. He's been completely healthy since that time. Agent Thorne's voice, though softened, pressed on with an unwavering resolve. "Every single treatment you believed you were funding for the past 18 months, they were entirely fictitious." I stared at him, my mind refusing to acknowledge the monstrous implications of his statement. But the invoices, the appointments, he appeared so frail and depleted after the chemotherapy sessions. "Mrs. Vance, there were no chemotherapy sessions." His voice grew sharper. "Your son has been meticulously filing fraudulent insurance claims for non-existent medical procedures while simultaneously extracting funds from you for these very same fabricated treatments." He laid out a detailed spreadsheet, columns of figures blurring before my eyes. "Our findings indicate he has siphoned upwards of $800,000 through this meticulously constructed deception." The room reeled around me. $800,000. I thought of my hollowed-out bank accounts, my beloved home sold, my retirement utterly dissolved. I recalled Adrian's feigned exhaustion after his treatments, the solemn gratitude in his eyes each time I signed another check. How is such a thing even possible?" I breathed. "It's far more prevalent than one might imagine," Agent Thorne explained, settling into the room's sole armchair. "Family members rarely scrutinize medical expenditures, especially when they genuinely believe a loved one's life hangs in the balance. Your son, Mrs. Vance, is extraordinarily cunning. He fabricated intricate billing statements, forged medical professionals' signatures, and even enlisted a confederate to impersonate a nurse and provide you with regular, reassuring updates." I remembered those calls. Sarah, the nurse, with the perpetually sweet voice, always so effusive in her praise for my dedication as a mother. Her calls invariably timed to coincide with my fleeting moments of doubt before writing yet another hefty sum. "But I witnessed his decline," I protested, my voice cracking. "He lost weight. He looked sick." "It was a performance, Mrs. Vance," Agent Thorne stated flatly, "and likely augmented by over-the-counter medications designed to induce specific symptoms. Weight loss, profound fatigue, bouts of nausea. These are all easily mimicked by a sufficiently motivated individual." The impotent fury I'd felt hours earlier paled into insignificance beside the volcanic rage now erupting within me. This transcended mere betrayal. This was a calculated, systematic malevolence, orchestrated by a person who had called me mother for nearly 4 decades. "What exactly do you require from me?" My own voice was alien to my ears, a brittle whisper stripped of all emotion. Agent Thorne leaned forward, his gaze unwavering. Your sworn testimony, your comprehensive financial statements, and your active cooperation in constructing a case robust enough to ensure his lengthy incarceration. He paused, his expression hardening. But I must caution you, Mrs. Vance, this path will be arduous. He is your son. Are you truly prepared for the profound repercussions? I surveyed the squalid confines of the room, my solitary suitcase, the meager remnants of a life Adrian had systematically dismantled while reveling in the opulence financed by my stolen legacy. My mind conjured the image of the ancestral home, the cherished inheritance from my own parents, sacrificed for a son who had never been in peril. Agent Thorne, I stated, my voice hushed but resolute. For 64 years, I have strived to be nothing less than a devoted mother. It's time I pursued justice. The resolute declaration still echoed in my ears as Agent Thorne began to unfurl a narrative of calculated deception. It had been less than 24 hours since I'd permitted him into my dismal motel room, but it felt like a lifetime. I cast my mind back to the woman I was just 2 years prior. Eleanor Vance, engrossed in the meticulous care of her prize-winning orchids, envisioning a tranquil retirement of quiet pursuits and perhaps finally that trip to the Scottish Highlands. The call that shattered that serenity came on a crisp autumn morning. Mother, I need you to brace yourself. Adrian's voice, usually so self-assured, was fragmented by what sounded like genuine terror. I've just left the clinic. It's a grim diagnosis, acute leukemia, advanced stage. I remembered the ceramic pot of Phalaenopsis slipping from my grasp, shattering on the polished stone floor. What are they saying? I'd managed to ask, my own voice a foreign croak. Aggressive, rapid progression, they want to start immediate intensive treatment. But the specialists, the experimental protocols, Mother, my insurance will barely scratch the surface. We're talking astronomical figures. That night, sleep was a distant memory. My mind raced, frantically sifting through assets. My pension, meticulously saved over decades. My small, charming cottage, the very one my parents had left me. My late husband's classic convertible, a cherished relic. It had to be enough. It would be enough. Adrian's life was worth every single penny. Now, seated across from Agent Thorne in a nondescript government conference room, a stark contrast to the faded opulence of my former home, I watched as he laid out a series of documents, each more damning than the last. Bank statements, falsified invoices, insurance rejection letters. A chilling mosaic of frauds so audacious it stole the very air from my lungs. The systematic fabrication of these medical invoices, Agent Thorne explained, tapping a finger on a document dated nearly 2 years ago, began around this time. Notice the sophisticated letterhead, the plausible billing codes. Your son, Mrs. Vance, engineered these himself on his personal computer, using a network of shell companies and virtual addresses to obscure the trail. I stared at the paper, identical to the dozens I diligently paid. How could I have been so blind? How was this uncovered? I whispered, the sound raw. Healthcare fraud detection has evolved significantly, Thorne replied, his voice devoid of judgment. When a single individual starts filing claims for a battery of high-cost, cutting-edge therapies, some of which are still in clinical trials, others completely non-existent, for upward of $50,000 a month, alarms are triggered. Adrian escalated rapidly. He began billing for procedures that were pure fiction, for unapproved medications, and even for treatments allegedly administered at facilities that don't even specialize in oncology. But the insurance payments? I pressed, a flicker of bewildered hope. Surely they covered some of it. Agent Thorne shook his head slowly. Mrs. Vance, there were no insurance payments. Every single claim was either immediately rejected or flagged for intensive investigation. The only consistent revenue stream for these treatments was you. A sickening wave washed over me. Every dollar, every sacrifice funneled directly into Adrian's coffers. He was living a life of utter extravagance while you were liquidating your entire existence. He then pushed forward a stack of bank statements that seemed to scream obscenity. Pages detailing lavish spending, bespoke suits, five-star dining, exotic vacations I'd never heard of, and transfers to accounts for a luxury apartment. "When you believed Adrian was recuperating in your guest suite," Thorne stated, his gaze unwavering, "he was actually residing in a high-rise penthouse overlooking the city. He'd been there for over a year by the time you moved in. The narrative of your guest room was merely a fabrication to prevent you from questioning his increasingly opulent lifestyle." My mind reeled. All those nights I'd lain awake in that quiet guest room, convinced Adrian was just down the hall, enduring his battle. All those mornings I'd prepared bland, easy-to-digest breakfasts, believing I was nurturing my fragile, ailing son. "Mrs. Vance." Thorne's voice softened, but his expression remained grave. "I must ask some difficult questions. Did you ever accompany Adrian to any of his treatments? Did you ever witness him receiving chemotherapy or radiation?" I closed my eyes, the memory a bitter pill. "He always said the treatments left him too vulnerable, too weak for visitors. He cited stringent clinic policies regarding family presence during the most aggressive phases. He'd tell me he didn't want me to see him in such a diminished state. And it had all sounded so reasonable, so utterly convincing. And the visible symptoms you described," Thorne continued, "the weight loss, the fatigue, the pallor, the hair loss." I paused, a horrifying realization dawning. His hair? It started thinning around the 3rd month. I thought it was the chemo, but it could have been shaved. The rest? Makeup, sleep deprivation, even certain medications designed to induce symptoms. Agent Thorne's grim nod confirmed my dawning horror. "Your son orchestrated a performance of profound suffering that lasted nearly 18 months. That requires not just cunning, but an almost pathological dedication. The inferno that now consumed me dwarfed the earlier blaze of impotent fury. This wasn't merely theft, it was a psychological assault, a prolonged, calculated torment inflicted by the very person who was supposed to be the beneficiary of my boundless love." "What comes next?" I asked, my voice barely a thread, but laced with an unshakable resolve. "How do we make him pay for this?" Agent Thorne had outlined the stark realities. A comprehensive settlement ensuring I recouped every stolen cent was contingent on my full collaboration, but the path to justice was paved with an agonizing choice. "Mrs. Vance," he'd said, his voice measured, "the prosecution's strongest case hinges on your testimony. Are you truly prepared to place your son behind bars?" The thought of Adrian's face, radiant with feigned gratitude for fictional treatments, superimposed itself over images of my ancestral home, irrevocably gone. My life savings, painstakingly accrued, now merely a ghost in my bank account. My twilight years, once envisioned with travel and peace, now reduced to the Sunset Gables Inn. I rose, straightening my shoulders, the flimsy motel skirt a stark contrast to the steel in my resolve. "Agent Thorne," I affirmed, my voice ringing with a conviction I hadn't felt in years, "I am not testifying against Adrian. I am testifying for truth, for justice, and I want every last penny with punitive interest returned." The next morning, armed with a hidden wire and a resolve forged in fire, I stood before the shimmering facade of Adrian's undisclosed residence. Agent Thorne's final caution echoed in my ears. "Every word, Mrs. Vance, will be recorded and potentially used as evidence." I'd merely shrugged. "His legal fate is the court's burden. My burden is to finally confront the illusionist who stole my life." The building was a monument to aspirational wealth, a tower of glass and steel piercing the city skyline, precisely the kind of sanctuary I'd imagined for my serene golden years. A stoic doorman whose perfectly creased uniform seemed to mock my threadbare existence directed me to the exclusive lift. As the polished chrome doors hissed open on the 23rd floor, Adrian appeared, swathed in an impossibly luxurious silk dressing gown, his hair tousled just so, an expensive coffee mug in hand. His shock was palpable, a fleeting crack in his polished facade. "Mother, how did you—" he stammered, his eyes wide. "Funny thing about well-kept secrets, Adrian," I replied, my voice dangerously calm as I brushed past him. "They rarely stay buried forever. The interior was a masterclass in minimalist luxury. Panoramic windows framed a breathtaking vista of the river, the city sprawling beneath like a jeweled carpet. Every piece of furniture looked like a curator's choice, each artwork a silent testament to a fortune I'd unwittingly funded. I traced the cool, unblemished surface of a vast marble island that dominated the open-plan kitchen. Quite the upgrade from my guest suite, wouldn't you say, Adrian? I murmured, my voice dripping with saccharine sweetness. You've certainly spared no expense. He tried to rally. Mother, please let me explain. Explain what, Adrian? I cut him off, spinning to face him, a predatory glint in my eye. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, I saw genuine terror flicker in his usually placid gaze. Explain how a man enduring the ravages of aggressive leukemia manages to finance such a lavish sanctuary? Explain how someone supposedly too frail for visitors has the vigor to maintain this monument to excess. His expressions morphed, from stunned disbelief to a brittle defensiveness. I don't know what you're implying. Oh, I'm not implying anything, sweetheart, I purred, pulling out my phone. I'm stating facts. I held up the screen, displaying a crisp photo Agent Thorne had provided. It was Adrian, just days prior, laughing boisterously at a high-end restaurant, surrounded by friends, a picture of vibrant health. This, I announced, was taken during your chemotherapy week, a week when, according to you, you were barely able to lift your head from the pillow. His eyes, wide with dawning horror, fixated on the image. I watched the frantic calculations behind them, the desperate scramble for another plausible lie. Mother, I swear I can explain everything. Sometimes I have better days. Stop it, Adrian. My voice, usually soft, cracked like a whip. Just stop the charade, I know. I know about the fabricated invoices. I know about the phantom treatments. I know about the fraudulent insurance claims. And I know, Adrian, that you've been in perfect health for nearly 2 years. The color drained from his face, leaving it ash gray. Who told you that? He croaked, barely audible. Does it matter? I retorted, my arm sweeping dramatically around the opulent living space. What matters is that you systematically plundered my entire life savings to finance this monument to your duplicity. My home, my retirement, my entire future, all sacrificed for a lie. Adrian sagged onto a plush leather sofa, a piece of furniture that likely cost more than my entire liquid net worth just days prior. You don't understand, Mother, he mumbled, avoiding my furious gaze. I was going to pay you back, every penny. Pay me back with what, Adrian? I sneered. The fictitious insurance payouts that never materialized? Or were you planning to perpetuate this elaborate fraud until I was truly destitute and gone? His shoulders slumped. It wasn't supposed to go this far, it just spiraled. It started as a temporary measure, just borrowing until I could get back on my feet after the actual diagnosis. Actual diagnosis? I repeated, the floor seeming to tilt beneath me once more. You mean, you did have cancer? He nodded, finally meeting my eyes, a flicker of genuine remorse or perhaps just self-pity there. A very small tumor, caught incredibly early, completely removed, almost exactly 2 years ago. He rushed on, his voice a desperate plea. But the initial medical bills were still enormous, Mother, and I'd just been laid off from my consulting job. I panicked. I just needed a little more time, a little cushion. You decided to play a dying man, didn't you, Adrian? I spat, my gaze burning into the stranger who bore my son's face. It wasn't meant to stretch this far, Adrian mumbled, his eyes darting away. But you were so eager to help, and the funds, they just simplified everything. I always intended to reimburse you after I secured a new position. Instead, you got accustomed to luxury built on my devastation. Adrian sprang from the sofa, striding to the vast window overlooking the cityscape. You don't grasp the terror, Mother, the fear of destitution, of watching everything crumble. Your offer, it felt like salvation. I offered salvation to my dying son, I seethed, not a blueprint for your unearned extravagance. What more could you possibly want from me? He turned back, his face etched with a raw fear I'd never witnessed, the genuine dread of accountability. I want every single cent returned, I declared, my voice a steel blade, compounded with interest for every moment you've profited while I wallowed in fabricated poverty. I straightened my posture, my coat a protective armor. And understand this, Adrian. The mother who would have gladly laid down her life for you perished the instant you served me that eviction notice. Mother, please, he pleaded, desperation cracking his facade. We can find a solution. I'll sell the penthouse, repay you in installments. Adrian, I stated, my voice hushed but devoid of warmth as I moved towards the elevator. You'd be wise to consult legal counsel. You're going to need it. As the elevator glided silently downwards, a sensation I hadn't known in decades surged through me. The potent, intoxicating satisfaction of reclaiming my autonomy. The legal machine, fueled by Agent Thorne's relentless efficiency, churned with surprising speed. Barely a week after my confrontation with Adrian, Thorne had meticulously constructed a formidable case. Bank records, artfully forged documents, claims for medical interventions that never existed. It wove a tapestry of calculated fraud, a narrative so damning it would challenge even the most ingenious defense counsel to unravel. But what I hadn't anticipated was Adrian's venomous counteroffensive. Mrs. Vance, Agent Thorne explained, his face grave during our meeting the following Monday, your son's legal team has filed a motion alleging your complicity in the fraud. My teacup rattled precariously in its saucer. Complicity? What on earth do you mean? They're asserting that no rational individual would continue remitting substantial payments for 18 months without demanding irrefutable proof of treatment. They suggest you were fully aware the invoices were falsified and actively participated in the elaborate insurance deception. The sheer gall of it stole my breath. So now, I was the orchestrator of criminal enterprise? It's a desperate gambit, Thorne admitted, pulling out a thick, official-looking document. But it certainly has the potential to muddy the waters. They're claiming, he continued, that you were a willing co-conspirator who only came forward once the entire edifice of their scheme began to crumble. I skimmed the accusations, each paragraph more preposterous than the last. Adrian's lawyer painted me as a cunning puppet master, having coerced my son into defrauding insurance companies so we could share the illicit gains. My narrative of maternal devotion, they argued, was merely a clever smokescreen for a sophisticated criminal partnership. How can they possibly substantiate such outrageous falsehoods? I demanded, my voice trembling with indignation. They don't need to definitively prove it, Mrs. Vance, Thorne replied, his expression hardening. They just need to cultivate reasonable doubt. He sighed. Your son's attorney is remarkably astute, and he's constructing a narrative that positions you as the true architect of this entire charade. Based on what evidence? I whispered, aghast. The fact that you never directly requested medical records, that you never accompanied him to supposed treatment sessions, that you sold your home and liquidated your entire retirement savings without demanding meticulous documentation of the expenses. He paused, his gaze regretful. From an external perspective, it could be construed as deliberate complicity or willful blindness. A crushing sense of claustrophobia descended upon me. So, my unconditional trust, my maternal instinct, is now being weaponized as proof of criminal intent? I'm afraid that's precisely their argument, Agent Thorne confirmed. The sheer, grotesque injustice of it left me reeling. I had surrendered every last vestige of my life, all out of profound love. And now, that sacred devotion was being contorted into damning evidence of a criminal conspiracy. What's our next move? I asked, my voice barely steady. We retaliate, Thorne stated, his resolve unwavering. We meticulously catalog every conversation, every transaction, every single instance that demonstrates your genuine, unwavering maternal concern. He reached for another file, his expression grim. But there's something else. Mrs. Vance, Agent Thorne continued, his voice heavy with a profound gravity that silenced the hum of the conference room. There's a further development in your son's defense strategy. Adrian has provided a sworn statement to his legal team, meticulously outlining his version of events. In essence, he's claiming that you were not merely complicit, but the architect of the entire fraud. My breath hitched. This wasn't merely a desperate gambit, it was a venomous dagger aimed straight at my jugular. He's accusing you of coercing him, of leveraging his genuine early diagnosis and your perceived financial vulnerability to orchestrate this scheme for both of your benefits. In exchange for this testimony and his continued cooperation in pinning the blame squarely on you, his counsel is negotiating for a greatly reduced sentence, potentially just probation and community service. The betrayal was so profound, it transcended anything I had felt before. It wasn't enough that he had stolen my home, my savings, my future. Now, Adrian sought to steal my freedom, to condemn me to a federal prison for crimes he had meticulously constructed. What am I looking at? I managed, my voice a strained whisper. Agent Thorne's gaze was unwavering. If a jury believes even a fraction of their narrative, Eleanor, you could be facing federal fraud charges with a potential sentence of 10 to 15 years. 15 years. At 64, that would effectively be the end of my life as I knew it. I would enter prison an elderly woman and emerge, if at all, a broken shadow, while Adrian, the true perpetrator, would walk free, having traded my life for his own. A cold, steely resolve began to calcify within me, my initial shock transmuted into an incandescent fury. "Agent Thorne," I stated, rising from my seat, my posture rigid with a newfound purpose. "I need you to open up Adrian's life, every single facet, his finances, his acquaintances, his secret indulgences, his activities during the entire period he was supposedly on his deathbed." I paced the room, my voice growing sharper, more focused. If my son wants to declare war, he's about to discover that his mother is no casualty of convenience. Someone capable of orchestrating an 18-month-long theatrical deception of this magnitude was not likely limiting his predatory behavior to just one target. I retrieved my coat, the flimsy fabric feeling like a battle shroud. "Find me everything, Agent Thorne. Every hidden account, every questionable transaction, every suspicious face in his lavish social circle, every illicit activity Adrian engaged in while I believed he was fighting for his life." Agent Thorne looked at me, a flicker of something akin to admiration in his usually stoic eyes. "That could take weeks, Mrs. Vance." "Then we'd best begin immediately," I retorted, my voice unwavering. I paused at the door, turning back to him. "Because if Adrian believes he can dismantle my life and then walk away unscathed, he's about to experience a profound awakening." The breakthrough arrived from an unexpected quarter, delivered by a woman who turned out to be more than just a fleeting name. "She called our office yesterday, Mrs. Vance," Agent Thorne explained during an urgent meeting 2 days later. "A Sarah Jensen. Apparently, she saw some of the local news coverage surrounding the initial fraud investigation and recognized Adrian's name. It seems she had been dating your son throughout a significant portion of his alleged illness." Sarah Jensen, a vibrant 28-year-old nurse from Metropolis General Hospital, sat across from us, her hands nervously twisting in her lap. "I should have come forward sooner," she murmured, her gaze flitting between us. "But Adrian made me promise secrecy. He said his mother was incredibly overprotective, and he didn't want to cause her any more stress by dating while he was recovering from a serious illness." A cold knot tightened in my stomach. So even in his deception, he used me as an excuse for his duplicity. "You knew he was sick?" I asked, the words barely audible. "That's the thing," Sarah replied, her voice gaining strength. "He told me he'd already beaten cancer. He said he was in full remission, but had to undergo a rigorous schedule of maintenance treatments to prevent a relapse." Agent Thorne had his notepad ready. "What kind of things didn't add up for you, Ms. Jensen?" Sarah leaned forward, her brow furrowed in recollection. "Well, for someone supposedly undergoing intense maintenance therapy, his hair never thinned or changed. He had endless energy for our outings, always planning trips and lavish dinners. He never seemed to suffer any fatigue or nausea after his appointments. He was so vital, so full of big plans and ambitious investments." She looked directly at me, her expression empathetic. "And then there was the way he acted when you called. He'd excuse himself, or if he couldn't, he'd put on this completely different persona." His voice would drop, sounding weak and tired. "Sometimes he'd even lie down on the couch and pretend to be too exhausted to move. It was like watching a switch flip." Sarah recounted how Adrian would transform, almost visibly before taking calls from me. It wasn't just a matter of fixing his hair, it was a deliberate physical staging. A subtle slump of the shoulders, a carefully practiced weary sigh, a faint pallor seemingly applied to his cheeks, all meticulously crafted before he'd lift the receiver. The memory twisted my gut. He had rehearsed his dying for my benefit. Sarah admitted she'd witnessed this multiple times, and once, when she'd innocently questioned him, Adrian had laughed it off, claiming he simply didn't want to alarm me by appearing too robust after his treatments. From her satchel, Sarah produced a slim portfolio of documents. "But there's more," she murmured, her voice laced with quiet shame. Adrian didn't just fabricate his illness. His financial life was an even grander illusion. She spread out bank statements and credit card bills, a shocking tableau of unchecked opulence that dwarfed anything I had ever contributed. Custom-tailored suits from Milan, private jet charters, high-stakes poker chips, and a limited-edition watch costing more than my entire liquid savings. Where on earth was he acquiring this kind of capital? Agent Thorne interjected, his gaze hardening on the figures. "That's precisely what I want to know," I stated, a fresh wave of nausea washing over me. My supposed monthly contribution for his medical expenses had barely scratched $4,000, yet Adrian was clearly spending 10 times that on pure indulgence. Sarah pointed to a credit card statement detailing an $18,000 transaction at a high-end art gallery. This was the very week he told you he was too debilitated by chemotherapy to even manage a brief phone call. I meticulously cross-referenced the dates with my own payment records. Every time I had signed a check, convinced I was funding his survival, he had been indulging in another extravagant spree. "Sarah," I began, my voice carefully modulated, "did Adrian ever allude to other substantial income streams?" "He was vague," she replied, her eyes flitting between Agent Thorne and me. "He mentioned some successful ventures, burgeoning investments, but—" She hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. "I think he might have been running other elaborate deceptions." "What kind of deceptions?" Agent Thorne prompted, his pen poised. "He had a circle of older acquaintances, people he'd connected with through a community outreach program for lonely seniors," Sarah explained, her brow furrowing with dawning horror. "He was always talking about how appreciative they were of his companionship, how they'd insisted on assisting him financially despite his modest protests. At the time, I thought it was rather sweet. Now—" Her voice trailed off, a chilling implication hanging in the air. "Now I suspect he was running the identical, heartless con on a multitude of vulnerable individuals." Agent Thorne and I exchanged a grim, unspoken acknowledgement. If Adrian had been systematically preying on other elderly people while simultaneously draining my life savings, the federal charges would ascend to an entirely different, far more severe level. "Do you have any names?" Agent Thorne asked, his voice low and urgent. "A few," Sarah confirmed, "and I might be able to access more." She retrieved her phone, her fingers flying across the screen. He trusted me with his social media passwords. For the next uninterrupted hour, we meticulously sifted through Adrian's digital life, like archaeologists unearthing a meticulously constructed, yet utterly corrupted, civilization. What we uncovered was a carefully curated network of relationships with lonely, affluent seniors, people he'd convinced he was a struggling yet noble young man valiantly battling a terminal illness, merely seeking companionship and perhaps a little compassionate assistance. "My God," I whispered, staring at message threads where Adrian played the role of the humble, grateful victim. A valiant young man facing down death, accepting loans from benevolent seniors. How many lives has he truly plundered? "At least a dozen that I can see here," Sarah stated, her voice tight with disgust. "And these are just the ones he communicated with via social media platforms. There could be others through more traditional channels." Agent Thorne was already reaching for his burner phone. "This is a seismic shift. We're no longer merely investigating complex insurance fraud. This is organized elder exploitation on an egregious scale." I watched my attorney connect with the dedicated FBI task force specializing in financial crimes against seniors, and in that moment, something profound shifted within me. This transcended the mere recuperation of my stolen assets. This was about shielding other unsuspecting souls from my son's cold, calculated malevolence. "Mrs. Vance," Sarah said softly, as Agent Thorne spoke in hushed tones with federal agents. "I am so profoundly sorry. I should have recognized his lies sooner. I should have done something." "You are not responsible for Adrian's monstrous choices," I replied, my voice steady, though my heart ached. "But I am immeasurably grateful you found the courage to step forward now." "What's going to happen to him?" Sarah asked, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and dawning comprehension. I looked out the expansive window at the gleaming cityscape, a testament to Adrian's stolen luxury, where his victims eked out an existence on meager Social Security checks and vanished life savings. "Justice," I stated simply, the word resonating with an unshakable conviction. "Finally, justice." The federal raid on Adrian's penthouse commenced at precisely 6 a.m. on a brisk Tuesday morning. Agent Thorne had invited me to observe the unfolding scene from a discreet vantage point across the street, suggesting I deserved to witness justice in action after the profound trauma my son had inflicted. "Is it wrong?" I mused aloud, a complex amalgam of grim satisfaction and profound sorrow stirring within me, "that I am savoring this moment? Is it wrong, Agent Thorne?" I articulated, my voice a delicate balance of relief and lingering grief as we observed federal agents methodically removing crates of evidence from the extravagant penthouse Adrian had so brazenly called home that I feel a sense of vindication. Agent Thorne, his demeanor as steady as ever, merely offered a slight nod. "Mrs. Vance, you are more than entitled to that satisfaction. Your son's predation extended to at least 18 elderly individuals. This operation far surpasses the scope of a personal vendetta now." 18 people. The tally had swelled as the investigation broadened its reach. There was Beatrice Caldwell, a spry 78 whose modest inheritance from her late husband had been systematically siphoned. Arthur Jenkins, a 72-year-old retired postal worker whose entire pension fund had been emptied to support the charming young man fighting for his life. Each narrative echoed mine, a cruel variation on the same theme. Vulnerable seniors, meticulously chosen, their deep-seated familial instincts exploited with surgical precision. "How much did he truly plunder in total?" I asked, though a part of me dreaded the answer. "Across all his victims, it exceeds $2.5 million, Agent Thorne responded, handing me a steaming mug of coffee from a thermos in the surveillance van. "Your son wasn't merely running a petty swindle, Mrs. Vance. He engineered and managed a highly sophisticated criminal network, $2.5 million. While I had been holed up in a threadbare motel, meticulously rationing my last few $100s, Adrian had been orchestrating a scheme so intricate it would have commanded the grudging respect of veteran con artists. The child I'd once taught to return stray coins had morphed into a master thief, pilfering the very foundations of other people's twilight years. My phone vibrated with a message from Mr. Patterson, Adrian's attorney. "Adrian's counsel requests an urgent meeting, claims new information has surfaced that drastically alters the case." I showed the text to Agent Thorne, who frowned thoughtfully. "That's incredibly opportune timing. We just concluded the search warrant less than an hour ago. Do you believe he's attempting to broker a deal?" "Most likely," she conceded, her gaze fixed on the bustling activity around the building. "But after what we unearthed inside his apartment this morning, I doubt any prosecutor would be inclined to negotiate." "What did you discover?" I pressed, a cold premonition settling in my gut. Agent Thorne retrieved her own phone, displaying a stark image of a leather-bound journal. Its pages were filled with elegant, precise handwriting. "Your son meticulously documented every single victim," she began, her voice grave. "Names, specific vulnerabilities, detailed psychological profiles, and even precise notes on which manipulative tactics proved most effective with each personality type." I stared at the photo, recognizing Adrian's distinctive script. Beneath my own name, a chilling entry read, "Mother, guilt-driven maternal instinct. Override logic by leveraging perceived medical crises. Highly susceptible to narratives of self-sacrifice. Will liquidate all assets for familial preservation." Reading my own emotional blueprint, painstakingly composed by my son for the sole purpose of my ruination, felt like undergoing a vivisection while fully conscious. "He observed us," I murmured, the words hollow. like specimens in a twisted experiment. Mrs. Vance, your son exhibits traits consistent with a sociopath, Agent Thorne affirmed, her expression grim as she put her phone away. This level of calculated manipulation and methodical planning transcends typical criminal behavior. It is deeply pathological. The upside is that this journal serves as an undeniable confession to his entire enterprise. He cannot possibly claim ignorance or accident when he's so thoroughly documented his criminal intent. What happens now? I inquired, my voice barely a whisper. We finalize the processing of this evidence, then present the entire case to the grand jury, she explained. With what we now possess, your son is looking at federal charges for wire fraud, mail fraud, egregious elder abuse, and severe money laundering. She paused, her gaze meeting mine directly. We're talking about a potential sentence of 25 to 30 years in federal prison. 25 to 30 years. Adrian would be in his early 60s upon release, assuming he survived that long. A vestige of sorrow stirred within me, a faint echo of the mother who had once patiently taught him to ride his bike, who had helped him painstakingly with his elementary school homework. But that part, I realized, was shrinking, fading with each new revelation of his depravity. Agent Thorne, I stated, watching the final evidence boxes disappear into government vehicles. I need to ask you something. When this inevitably goes to trial, Adrian's legal team will undoubtedly attempt to portray me as a willing co-conspirator again. His lawyer will argue I was too intelligent, too astute, not to have known what was transpiring. I turned to face her, meeting her unwavering gaze. Do you believe I was involved? Agent Thorne studied me for a prolonged moment, her expression unreadable. Mrs. Vance, I've dedicated 12 years to investigating complex financial crimes. I've witnessed genuine criminal partnerships between family members, and I've seen countless victims utterly devastated by individuals they trusted implicitly. She gestured towards the imposing building Adrian had just vacated. What happened to you was not complicity. It was profound, calculated abuse. How can you be so certain? I asked, a fragile hope blossoming in my chest. Because true architects of sophisticated fraud do not dismantle their own lives. Because true architects of sophisticated fraud, Agent Thorne asserted, her gaze piercing, don't impoverish their own alleged co-conspirators. They don't watch their partners lose everything while they revel in stolen wealth. She tapped the cover of Adrian's journal, its pages still open to my personal entry. His meticulous notes on how to exploit your guilt-driven maternal instinct and leverage perceived medical crises are not the scribblings of someone with a willing accomplice. They are the calculated blueprint of a predator targeting an unwitting victim. A profound sense of relief, like a deep breath held for years, finally expanded my chest. It wasn't just my perspective anymore. It was the unvarnished truth, articulated by an expert. I wasn't an idiot or complicit. I was the casualty of a son who had expertly turned my boundless love into his most potent weapon. As we prepared to depart the surveillance van, Agent Thorne paused. Eleanor, she began, her tone softer now. There's one more thing. Several of Adrian's other victims have requested to speak with you. My eyebrows shot up. Me? Why? Because you were the linchpin, Mrs. Vance, Thorne clarified, a flicker of warmth in her eyes. Your courage, your refusal to back down, that's what truly cracked this case wide open. She produced a discreet card. A support network is forming for those who've experienced similar familial exploitation. A woman named Dorothy Chen is leading it, and she specifically hopes you might consider joining. She believes your perspective would be invaluable. I held the card, a silent roster of unseen faces, of lives upended by betrayal echoing my own, each name a testament to trust abused. Yes, I said, my voice clear. I believe I'd like that very much. As the vehicle pulled away from the gleaming tower that had been Adrian's false sanctuary, a seismic shift occurred within me. The rage, once an all-consuming fire, had solidified into something colder, harder, an unshakable resolve. This wasn't merely about personal vengeance now. It was about relentless accountability, about extending a hand to those Adrian had also preyed upon, and about meticulously reconstructing the fragments of a life he had so casually shattered. Adrian had expertly wielded my unwavering trust as a weapon. Now, I would learn to channel the searing power of truth itself. Days later, in the sterile confines of a federal courthouse conference room, I came face to face with Adrian's counsel, a gaunt man named Julian Blackwood. He looked utterly defeated, as if the sheer weight of Adrian's accumulating charges, from complex fraud to egregious elder abuse and federal racketeering, was physically crushing him. "Mrs. Vance," he began, his voice strained, "my client wishes to express his profound regret for the distress he has inflicted upon you. Your client wishes to mitigate a potential lifetime behind federal bars," I countered, my tone unwavering. "Let's dispense with this hollow charade of contrition." Blackwood shifted, visibly uncomfortable. "Adrian has empowered me to propose full financial recompense for all victims, coupled with a formal public apology and exhaustive cooperation with any ongoing investigations." "And what, precisely, is the price of this sudden cooperative spirit?" Agent Thorne interjected, her gaze cold. "A plea agreement," Blackwood announced, pushing a formidable stack of papers across the table, reducing his sentence to a mere 5 years, with parole eligibility in 3. He will plead guilty to all charges and, crucially, offer insight into other individuals who might be orchestrating comparable deceptions. A derisive scoff escaped me. "Other individuals? Are we now inventing a grand criminal syndicate to deflect from Adrian's singular depravity?" Mr. Blackwood attempted a placating smile. "Mrs. Vance, I appreciate your understandable ire." "Mr. Blackwood," I interrupted, my voice sharpening, "I am not ireful. I am informed." I retrieved my own slim folder compiled with Agent Thorne's precision. "Your client, it turns out, kept impeccable records of his nefarious activities. We possess irrefutable proof that he operated as a solo architect of this scheme. We know he systematically profiled and targeted his victims, and we know, thanks to his own chilling journal, that his contingency plan involved framing me entirely when his house of cards inevitably collapsed." Blackwood's carefully constructed composure fractured. That was merely a misinterpretation." "A misinterpretation?" I rose slowly, the weight of my years, not in weariness, but in an unyielding resolve, anchoring me. "Your client, in his own hand, detailed my guilt-driven maternal instinct and described me as highly susceptible to narratives of self-sacrifice. He called me a specimen. That, Mr. Blackwood, is not a misinterpretation. That is a meticulously crafted confession of premeditated exploitation. My client was under immense personal pressure," Blackwood stammered. "Your client," I retorted, leaning forward, my gaze locking onto his, "was under the immense pressure of counting untold sums of stolen money. Let me elucidate something for you, Mr. Blackwood, about the formidable intuition of mothers. For decades, we hone our ability to discern motives, to detect deceit, to shield our kin from every conceivable peril. The singular reason your client triumphed in his elaborate charade was because the most insidious threat I could ever imagine was seated, with feigned fragility, at my own dinner table." Agent Thorne intervened, her voice measured but firm. "Mr. Blackwood, Adrian Vance's journal extends beyond a mere confession. It contains intricate psychological profiles of 16 victims, along with precise methodologies for their emotional and financial manipulation. The prosecution's forensic handwriting experts were poised to testify, confirming that the chilling entries within Adrian's leather-bound journal had been meticulously penned over many months, not in a fit of sudden despair. This was no impulsive transgression. It was a coldly calculated systemic criminal enterprise. Julian Blackwood, Adrian's counsel, seemed to shrink further into his bespoke suit, his professional composure eroding with each damning revelation. He clearly saw his own legal reputation teetering on the brink. "Mrs. Vance," he tried again, his voice laced with forced earnestness, "what would it take to consider a plea agreement?" "Nothing," I stated, my voice devoid of emotion, a stark counterpoint to the turmoil Adrian had orchestrated in my life. "There is no plea agreement that can erase 18 months of believing my son was slowly dying. There is no deal that will resurrect the home I inherited from my beloved parents. There is no bargain that restores the tranquil retirement I've been systematically robbed of." Blackwood persisted, desperate. "Mrs. Vance, prison won't truly solve anything. Adrian needs psychiatric evaluation, intensive therapy, a chance at true rehabilitation. Mr. Blackwood, I interrupted, a brittle edge to my voice. I dedicated 35 years of my life to providing my son with every conceivable form of guidance, emotional support, and the finest education. I gave him boundless love and every opportunity to become a decent human being. He consciously chose to become a predator instead. I gathered my sparse papers, the action a deliberate punctuation mark to my resolve, and rose to my feet. The time for rehabilitation was before he systematically defrauded over $2 million from vulnerable elderly individuals. Now, I concluded, my gaze unyielding, it is time for justice to run its unhindered course. Blackwood's gaze darted desperately to Agent Thorne, a silent plea for intervention. Surely the government would prioritize cooperation over the arduous process of a lengthy trial. Agent Thorne met his gaze with a cool, unyielding stare. Mr. Blackwood, your client's meticulously kept records provide an abundance of evidence. We don't require his cooperation when we possess his confession, meticulously documented in his own hand. A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched her lips. Furthermore, this case presents an unparalleled opportunity to send an unequivocal message to other potential criminals. Targeting senior citizens will result in severe, far-reaching consequences. A lengthy, high-profile trial serves our purposes perfectly. As we exited the sterile conference room, a profound sensation settled over me. A quiet, unwavering confidence in the inevitable outcome. Adrian's monumental arrogance, his absolute conviction in his own superior intellect, had ironically been his undoing. He had so meticulously cataloged his own depravity that he had effectively outsmarted himself directly into a federal prison cell. "Mrs. Vance," Agent Thorne remarked softly as we walked towards the elevator, her expression a mix of weary professionalism and grim amusement, "there's something else you should know. Adrian has been actively making calls from jail." "To whom?" I inquired, though a chilling premonition already answered the question. "Mostly to the families of other inmates," she clarified, shaking her head in genuine astonishment. "He's been attempting to initiate new sympathy scams, leveraging his current incarceration to elicit funds. It seems your son is quite literally incapable of honest behavior." I felt no shock, no surge of surprise. A man who could feign a terminal illness for 18 months, callously watching his own mother sacrifice her entire existence, was hardly going to suddenly develop a moral compass within the confines of a county lockup. "Agent Thorne," I stated as the elevator doors hissed shut, "I want to be present when the verdict is read." She paused, her gaze searching mine. "Are you certain, Eleanor? Witnessing your son being sentenced to decades in federal prison will not be an easy experience. Neither was liquidating my ancestral home to fund his phantom chemotherapy," I retorted, my voice steady, imbued with the strength I had painstakingly reclaimed. "But I endured that, and I will endure this too." The crucial difference, I realized, was that this time I wasn't confronting the ordeal in isolation. I had found an unlikely family in Dorothy Chen and the other victims. I had the unwavering support of Agent Thorne and the dedicated FBI task force, who had treated me not as a mere statistic, but as a person whose life had been savagely plundered. And I had Mr. Patterson, the remarkable pro bono attorney who had refused a fee, stating that some cases were fundamentally about justice, not monetary gain. Most importantly, I had rediscovered myself, the woman who had raised a child, mourned a husband, and meticulously built a life worth treasuring. Adrian had stolen my money and my home, but he had failed to steal my inherent strength. That, it appeared, was something even the most sophisticated criminal could not truly seize. The support group convened every Thursday at the local community center. Stepping into that first meeting felt uncannily like entering a room full of reflections. 15 faces, each etched with subtle variations of the same profound expression I had carried for months, the unmistakable look of individuals who had discovered, in the most brutal way imaginable, that trust, when weaponized, could indeed be a fatal flaw. Dorothy Chen, the matriarch who had lost her late husband's entire life insurance payout to Adrian's elaborate fabrication, had naturally assumed the mantle of our unofficial leader. At 73, Dorothy possessed a formidable, incisive intelligence that, in other circumstances, would make one question how anyone could have ever deceived her. Until, that is, you remembered that intellect itself was defenseless when someone expertly twisted your own compassion into an instrument of betrayal. "Eleanor," she said, rising to embrace me with a warmth that felt like a long-forgotten comfort. We were old friends rather than mere acquaintances, united by the shared crucible of betrayal. "I'm profoundly glad you joined us, Eleanor," Dorothy said, her voice a balm. "Thank you for spearheading this," I replied, surveying the semicircle of chairs thoughtfully arranged in the bright, recently repurposed community hall. "How many of us are there now?" 19 confirmed individuals, Dorothy responded, a familiar blend of weary indignation and persistent sadness coloring her tone. "But the federal agents suspect there are more. Your son, Adrian Vance, was exceptionally methodical in his preparatory research." As each person stepped forward to articulate their harrowing narrative, I recognized the echoes of my own devastating experience. Elias Vance, a retired academic, described how he'd first encountered Adrian at a local historical society, where my son had supposedly volunteered to contribute to the community while bravely battling his illness. Clara Bellwether, a former music teacher, recounted finding Adrian feigning disorientation in a botanical garden. She had kindly driven him home, only to be systematically entangled in months of spiraling medical contributions. "The most insidious part," declared Thomas Sterling, a veteran living on a modest pension who had lost $60,000, "is how intimately he understood us. Not just our names or our finances, but the very fabric of our personalities. What vulnerabilities would compel us to offer help? He meticulously studied us," I stated, recalling the chilling pages of the journal Agent Thorne had shown me. "He actually penned down our psychological profiles." "What did yours say?" Clara asked, her voice hushed. I closed my eyes, the clinical detachment of Adrian's words resurfacing in my memory. "Highly prone to guilt, especially when family is perceived to be in peril. Extremely amenable to self-sacrifice, will divest all assets to ensure familial preservation." The room fell into a heavy silence. Finally, Dorothy broke the stillness. "Mine noted, recently widowed, deep-seated nurturing instincts, carries residual guilt from spouse's passing, therefore seeks validation through acts of utility." One by one, the others relayed the fragments they remembered from their own profiles, discovered during the federal raid on Adrian's lavish apartment. Each description was brutally, surgically accurate, reducing complex human beings to a stark list of exploitable weaknesses. "How did he perceive us so accurately?" Thomas asked, a tremor in his voice. "Because he spent months observing us before he made his move," I replied. "Agent Thorne informed me he would frequent the same locations repeatedly, watching people, eavesdropping on conversations, meticulously learning our routines and our emotional tender spots." "So we were marked," Clara whispered, her eyes wide with a dawning horror, "like prey being stalked." "Precisely," Dorothy affirmed, her voice steel-edged. "But we endured, and now he is the one ensnared." She was right. While we sat in a humble community hall, painstakingly rebuilding our shattered lives and our fractured faith in humanity, Adrian Vance was confined in a federal holding cell, awaiting his trial. The predator had become the captive. "There's another development," Dorothy continued, her gaze sweeping across the room. "The prosecutor's office contacted me this morning. They are requesting that some of us present impact statements at Adrian's sentencing hearing." "To what end?" Elias inquired. "To convey to the judge the profound and lasting impact of his crimes on our lives, to imbue the cold figures of financial damage with human faces and suffering." Dorothy's eyes settled on me. "Eleanor, they specifically requested that you speak." I had been dreading this precise moment since the investigation's inception. Standing in a courtroom exposing my humiliation and detailing my son's betrayal to a room full of strangers felt like an agonizing re-victimization. "I'm not certain I can," I admitted, my voice barely a whisper. "You are under no obligation," Dorothy said gently, her empathy a comfort. "But consider this. Your testimony could be instrumental in securing the maximum possible sentence for Adrian. It could serve as a powerful deterrent, preventing him from ever inflicting such harm on other innocent individuals. Thomas added, his expression grim. It also grants you the opportunity to convey, unequivocally, exactly what you perceive of his choices. That night, alone in my modest apartment, the safe haven I had secured after escaping the motel's despair, I began to draft my statement. It started as a letter to my son, a cathartic outpouring of 35 years of unconditional love, repaid with cold, calculated cruelty. It swelled to a comprehensive 12-page indictment. But as I reread it, a crucial realization solidified within me. This wasn't truly about Adrian anymore. It was about every other potential victim out there, every other trusting parent or grandparent who might one day encounter the next sophisticated predator. I reached for my phone and dialed Dorothy. "I'll testify," I told her, my voice clear and resolute, "but not for retribution, for deterrence." "What do you mean?" she asked. "I want other families to hear what transpired with us. I want parents to grasp that their own profound, when children can become predatory threats. I want the next Adrian Vance to comprehend that targeting seniors isn't a victimless act. It's a systemic assault on individuals who have dedicated their lives to building and contributing to society." Dorothy's gaze met mine, a soft smile gracing her lips. "Eleanor," she said, her voice filled with quiet pride, "I think you've truly found your voice." And she was right. For 64 years, I had navigated life primarily defined by my relationships, a daughter, a wife, a mother. But now, finally, I was forging my own identity as Eleanor Vance, a woman who unequivocally refused to allow such insidious evil to masquerade as familial love. The federal courthouse, a stoic monument of granite and glass, hummed with a palpable tension and the relentless click of cameras on the morning of Adrian's sentencing hearing. Apparently, the extraordinary tale of a son who meticulously faked a terminal illness to systematically plunder his own mother's entire existence had seized the public's imagination with an intensity that genuinely surprised everyone, including the seasoned prosecutors. "Mrs. Vance," Agent Thorne murmured, her voice calm amidst the pre-trial chaos as we waited in the sequestered witness room. "Are you prepared for this?" I smoothed the fabric of my navy blue dress, the very one I had worn to my husband's funeral a decade prior, and met her gaze with a resolute nod. "I have been ready for months, Agent Thorne," I replied, the words steady. "Remember," she cautioned gently, her eyes softening slightly, "you'll be addressing Judge Caldwell directly, not Adrian. Your focus should be on the profound impact of his crimes, not on your personal relationship, as challenging as that distinction may be." Through the discreet tinted window, I could make out Adrian, seated at the defense table in a stark, muted gray jumpsuit, looking impossibly diminished against the backdrop of the grand courtroom. His legal counsel, Julian Blackwood, had stubbornly insisted on a full jury trial, apparently convinced that a panel of ordinary citizens would never condemn someone's son for merely assisting with medical bills, regardless of the mountain of evidence against him. He had been devastatingly mistaken. The jury had deliberated for a mere 3 hours before returning a unanimous verdict. Adrian Vance was guilty on all counts. The damning evidence, Adrian's chilling notebooks filled with victim profiles, the meticulously forged medical documents, the irrefutable bank records detailing luxury purchases brazenly funded by stolen money, had painted a portrait of depravity so undeniable that even his own mother, me, had offered testimony that served to convict him, patiently explaining to the prosecution the intricate web of manipulation that had ensnared my maternal instincts. "Mrs. Vance," Judge Caldwell's voice, calm and authoritative, cut through the quiet reverence of the courtroom. "The court is ready for your victim impact statement." I walked toward the podium, acutely aware of the weight of every gaze in that packed room. Adrian, for the first time since his arrest, slowly raised his head and looked directly at me. And in his eyes, I saw something that unexpectedly arrested me, a flicker of genuine terror, not of the impending prison sentence, but of the unvarnished truth I was about to utter about him in front of all these people. "Your Honor," I began. My voice, though quiet, resonated with an unwavering clarity. "My name is Eleanor Vance, and I stand before this court today to speak for 19 victims who placed their sacred trust in someone we believed we knew." I had meticulously rehearsed this speech for weeks, but standing there, with my son a mere 20 feet away, the words took on a raw, unforeseen power. Adrian Vance isn't merely a common criminal who stole money. He is a calculated predator who systematically studied elderly individuals, dissecting us like laboratory specimens, meticulously identifying our emotional vulnerabilities so he could ruthlessly exploit our deepest strengths. I pulled forth the stark, chilling page Agent Thorne had provided me, a photocopy of Adrian's own handwriting. "This, Your Honor," I announced, holding it aloft for the court to see, "is my own psychological profile, meticulously penned by my son. It reduces 64 years of a life lived, of boundless maternal love and sacrifice, to a stark list of exploitable weaknesses." I began to read Adrian's clinical assessment of my character, my voice steady despite the tremor in my soul. I watched the faces of the jurors who had remained to hear the sentencing. Several looked utterly disgusted. One woman openly wept. "Your Honor," I continued, "the financial damage caused by Mr. Vance is both obvious and measurable. I lost my ancestral home, my entire retirement savings, my fundamental sense of security. Dorothy Chen lost her late husband's entire life insurance payout. Arthur Jenkins emptied his hard-earned pension account. The ledger of stolen wealth is staggering." I shifted my gaze, locking it directly with Adrian's. His eyes, though shadowed, remained fixed on the table before him. "But the emotional damage, Your Honor," I pressed on, "is immeasurably harder to calculate. How does one measure the true value of shattered trust? How does one put a price on the ability to believe that people are fundamentally good and honorable? How does one ever truly compensate another human being for losing faith in their own judgment, their own maternal instincts?" Adrian's lawyer, Julian Blackwood, shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his professional facade finally cracking. But my son himself sat perfectly still, his gaze still stubbornly fixed on the polished table in front of him, betraying no emotion. "Your Honor," I stated, my voice ringing with absolute certainty, "I want to make one thing unequivocally clear. I am not here today seeking vengeance against my son. I am here to demand justice for 19 vulnerable seniors who committed no other crime than the profound act of caring. Someone else's suffering." I paused, allowing the gravity of my own words to settle over the hushed courtroom. We are often told that this nation values its elders, that we honor the decades of contribution, the labor, the savings that built our communities. Adrian Vance's crimes were a direct assault on those foundational principles. But here, Your Honor, is what I implore everyone present to truly grasp, I continued, my voice gaining an unwavering strength. We, his victims, not only survived his calculated treachery, we found each other. We refused to let the corrosive shame of betrayal or the silent agony of embarrassment isolate us further. I looked at Dorothy, Elias, Clara, and Thomas, seated in the gallery, their faces a testament to shared ordeal and burgeoning resilience. We transformed our victimization into a formidable advocacy, Your Honor. Adrian Vance pilfered our assets, but he could not plunder our spirit. He exploited our sacred trust, yet he failed to demolish our collective capacity for justice. He endeavored to instill in us a profound shame for our compassion, but instead, he unwittingly revealed to us the immense power we inherently possessed. I turned my gaze back to my son, meeting his eyes for what I knew, deep within my soul, would be the final time. "Adrian, you taught me a lesson I never wished to learn, that true evil can masquerade beneath a familiar countenance. It can articulate its destructive intentions with a beloved voice, systematically dismantling lives while maintaining a deceptive smile at Sunday dinner." My voice remained steady, meticulously controlled. "But you also imparted to me the undeniable truth that I am more resilient than I ever conceived. That survival, even through the most harrowing trials, is profoundly possible. That justice, though often delayed, will ultimately prevail. Your Honor," I concluded, turning back to Judge Caldwell, "I respectfully ask that you sentence Adrian Vance not solely for the direct damage he inflicted upon us, but for the insidious ideology he embodies, the profound betrayal of trust, the calculated exploitation of unconditional love, and the predatory targeting of vulnerable individuals who, by every measure of human decency, deserved protection, not predation. As I walked back to my seat, a sensation I hadn't known in uncounted months settled over me. A complete, profound peace. Everything that needed to be articulated had been said. The remainder was now entrusted to the unwavering machinery of justice. Judge Caldwell sentenced Adrian to 25 years in federal prison without the possibility of parole. As the bailiffs escorted him away, he turned back once, his eyes scanning the gallery for my face. I was looking directly back at him, and for the very first time in this entire torturous ordeal, I was not the one who averted my gaze first. 6 months after Adrian's sentencing, I stood in the kitchen of my new home. It wasn't a palatial estate, but a genuine sanctuary with 2 bedrooms and a modest garden where I could, once again, cultivate my beloved heirloom tomatoes. I was reading a letter that had arrived that morning. "Dear Mother," it began, penned in handwriting I barely recognized as my son's, the script somehow alien now. "I know I have no conceivable right to contact you, and I am fully aware you will likely dismiss everything I say, but I feel compelled to attempt to explain what truly happened, even if you can never bring yourself to forgive me." I almost discarded the letter, almost, but a flicker of something, perhaps a morbid curiosity, compelled me to continue reading. "I never embarked on this path with the intention of causing you pain. I understand how impossible that sounds now, but it is the truth. When I received the initial diagnosis of a small tumor, I was consumed by terror, not just the fear of cancer itself, but the overwhelming dread of destitution, of being perceived as weak, of losing everything I had painstakingly built. When you so generously offered to assist with my medical bills, it truly felt like an absolute lifeline. But then the tumor was successfully removed, and I should have immediately disclosed to you that everything was fine. Instead, I simply panicked. I had already accepted funds from you, and I was paralyzed by the fear that you would be furious for having taken your money when, in fact, I no longer genuinely required it. So, I lied. Just this once, I convinced myself, just until I could manage to repay you. But lies, as I soon learned, possess an insidious capacity for growth, and the longer I procrastinated, the exponentially more difficult it became to confess the truth. Then, a dangerous clarity descended upon me. I realized just how effortlessly one could manipulate the profound sympathy of others, and in that moment, something shifted irrevocably within me. I set the letter down on the cool marble counter, pouring myself a fresh cup of coffee before resuming. Even from behind federal bars, even after the catastrophic wreckage he had wrought, Adrian was still constructing elaborate self-justifications. "I know you will find this impossible to believe, but I genuinely convinced myself that I was actually helping you feel purposeful. You had seemed so utterly lost after Father passed away, and my supposed illness, the act of caring for me, appeared to provide you with a renewed sense of meaning. I rationalized that you were happier, feeling indispensably needed, even if that need was a carefully orchestrated fabrication. I was wrong about absolutely everything. I comprehend that now." The prison's behavioral specialist explained that I exhibit traits consistent with a narcissistic personality disorder, intertwined with sociopathic tendencies. Apparently, I have been fundamentally incapable of perceiving others. Adrian's penmanship, now jarringly unfamiliar, continued his elaborate plea. "You were never truly a person to me, Mother, more a wellspring, a resource, and for that I am, I suppose, genuinely sorry." He conceded that his prison psychologist had diagnosed him with a profound inability to perceive others as fully dimensional beings, a blend of severe narcissistic traits and sociopathy. He acknowledged the monumental scope of his deception, the 18 months she thought he was dying, the stolen home and future. "The walls here have a peculiar way of sharpening one's vision," he wrote. "The other men they know, they have mothers too. They possess a primal disdain for those who betray their own blood. I've learned what it feels like to be truly isolated, truly vulnerable, truly without a trustworthy soul. Perhaps this, Mother, is the true face of justice." Dewey, he closed with a brittle hope for her peace and happiness, mentioning the Vance Foundation that Agent Thorne's team had relayed news of. "It's a noble endeavor, Mother," he penned, a final chilling touch, exactly what Eleanor Vance would dedicate herself to. I reread the letter, not once, but twice, a cold clinical assessment of his supposed epiphany. It held the faint scent of another performance, yet a part of me registered the subtle shift in his tone, a grudging concession to reality. I folded it deliberately, placing it not in a drawer, but into a file marked Adrian, a permanent yet contained record. The Vance Foundation for Financial Empowerment, as it was now known, had flourished far beyond my initial, tentative hopes with Dorothy. We'd helped 72 families navigate the aftermath of familial exploitation, offering not just legal guidance, but also therapeutic support and practical assistance in rebuilding lives. We were actively campaigning for stronger legislative protections for vulnerable seniors. My phone chimed, Dorothy's vibrant energy instantly grounding me. "Eleanor, are you ready for the national broadcast this afternoon?" she asked. "As ready as I'll ever be, my friend," I affirmed. A prominent news network was featuring our work, and they'd specifically requested my testimony. "No reservations about laying bare your soul for the cameras?" Dorothy probed gently. My gaze swept across the framed photographs in my sun-drenched kitchen, the diverse faces of our support group, my new chosen family, a recent photo with Agent Thorne, whose calls were still a comforting regularity, a shot of Mr. Patterson, our brilliant pro bono counsel, laughing boisterously at one of our monthly dinners. "None at all," I stated, my voice firm. "If sharing our truth spares even one other family this particular brand of heartbreak, it's a necessary sacrifice." Later that afternoon, under the relentless glare of the studio lights, with a seasoned journalist prompting me to revisit the darkest chapter of my life, a profound sense of peace descended. The residual tendrils of shame and self-blame had finally dissipated, transmuted into an unwavering resolve. "Ms. Vance," the reporter inquired, her tone respectful, "what counsel would you offer to others grappling with similar betrayals?" I leaned into the microphone, my gaze piercing the lens of the camera. I would tell them that love, however profound, does not equate to blind allegiance, and trust, when it involves your entire future, demands diligence. It is not only acceptable, but absolutely imperative, to demand proof when significant sums are requested, even by those closest to you. Scrutinize medical invoices, verify investment claims, protect your own financial well-being, because sometimes the most dangerous threat comes cloaked in familial affection. "And forgiveness, Ms. Vance?" she continued. "Do you foresee a day when you might forgive your son?" I paused, the image of Adrian's letter, his calculated remorse, flickering in my mind. "Forgiveness," I articulated, "is a personal emancipation. I have forgiven myself for the misplaced faith, for the part of me that, in my profound desire to be a devoted mother, overlooked every glaring red flag. I have forgiven myself for being human, for being vulnerable." I took a breath. As for Adrian, forgiveness is not a right he possesses. It is a privilege he must earn through genuine, sustained contrition and demonstrable change. It is not something I owe him. "What does the future hold for Eleanor Vance?" the reporter asked, a hint of admiration in her voice. I smiled, thinking of my budding rose garden, the foundation's growing impact, the vibrant tapestry of friendship woven from shared adversity. "Next," I replied, the word imbued with newfound strength, "I flourish. I live authentically, with discernment, and entirely on my own terms. For 6 decades, my identity was primarily defined by my relationships. Now at last I am simply Eleanor Vance, and that, I realize, is more than enough." As the studio lights dimmed and the camera crew began to dismantle their meticulous setup, Dorothy, a radiant smile gracing her lips, materialized with a chilled bottle of champagne. "To every single seed of justice we've sown," she declared, uncorking it with a celebratory pop, "and to the boundless flourishing that follows." I took the flute she offered, the delicate bubbles mirroring the effervescence in my own heart. "To flourishing," I affirmed, clinking our glasses together, the sound a sweet chime of newfound sisterhood forged in the crucible of shared adversity. Through the window of my own kitchen, a genuine sanctuary where I cultivated not just heirloom tomatoes, but also a profound, unshakable peace, I observed the first blush of ripeness on the vines. Simple, honest growth, nurtured in soil that was unequivocally mine, in a life that, at long last, belonged solely to me. It was everything I had fought for. It was, indeed, more than enough. It was, finally, simply Eleanor Vance.